Before we begin, I just want to issue what I guess you'd call a warning. This book, Her Too, and our conversation about it involves themes involving sexual violence. And if anyone finds that disturbing, I want you to feel free to exit at any point online or here in the room. And Jamie's going to drive this particular ship, but before she does, I just want to tell, for the people who are here, my friends and may not have known Jamie already, she is the critically acclaimed author of these 3 brilliant novels, which I would describe as literary thrillers. And I have to tell you, her most recent one, Hidden Things, got stars from all of the professional reviewers, but also got endorsements from the biggest names in the business, including people like Jeffrey Deaver, Tana French. So she is a star in this field. I'm very lucky that she found the time to read my book and come here today.
Thank you. Thank you. To start out with, when we're talking about Her Too, I got the privilege, being in high places like I am. Sometimes I get to see books early, so I got to see Her Too this spring before all of you. And people who read in our corner of the bookstore love reveals and twists, and this book delivers in such volume and by the barge load that I want to be really careful about spoilers. I want to let you guys get to experience this as all of these incredible reveals. And we're going to talk about, you know how packing cubes and you can take a lot more stuff than you would normally, because I don't know how you did it. So we're not going to talk about a whole lot of specific plot points because I want you to get a chance to enjoy this on your own. One first question though, that's not really about this book, is about you as a lawyer. In my immediate critique circle, I have 3, and I can think of half a dozen other litigators turned authors. And that makes perfect sense to me because litigators have to take facts and create a persuasive narrative out of them. Right. And of course, writers do it, but we just have to make up the facts. How does it? I don't think as a lawyer you made up your own facts. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with that.
How do you shade and color?
Right. How does it? Tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's fascinating, even though it makes perfect sense. How did you always want to do this?
I always wanted to write. I wrote as a child, as a teenager. I wrote my first full-length novel my sophomore year in college. And with all of the hubris of a sophomore, I sent it off to the big-time New York publisher, just sat back waiting for the check to come. And what came instead was immediately a rejection letter. We do not accept unsolicited manuscripts. And I was completely daunted. I mean, it really did take all the wind out of my sails. And I thought, I don't want to be a starving artist in the garret. I want to be able to earn my own way in this world. And so I decided to go to law school and really, got immersed in the law. It's a very jealous mistress. It takes all of your time, or tries to, but I still wanted to write. And so I found time, even though I had 2 small children, I would just make time and wrote my first novel, other than the failed sophomore novel, wrote it on the train on a legal pad in longhand. It was incredible. I could never do that today. But I think that being a lawyer is a very good training for being a writer, especially if you're a litigator. If you're a transactional lawyer, maybe you don't get to tell stories the same way. But when you're a litigator, you're taking the facts of a case and repackaging them, massaging them, shaping them, putting them in a way that will be the most persuasive for the judge, the Court of Appeals, for the jury, if you're presenting an opening statement or a closing argument. And so I always felt like I was a storyteller, and it wasn't a hard transition. In fact, my first several novels, which were written under a different name earlier than these, were directly inspired by some cases that I worked on. So I was actually able to take facts and make them more exciting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because one thing about crime fiction, and I don't know how you feel about this, but bad things happening make people do interesting things. So in some ways, outside of straight literary fiction, sometimes we have fish in a barrel, because people are going to do interesting things when terrible things happen.
People in crisis are the most interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all of your best stories. One of the things I like to ask people is, I ran across this amazing thing about you can always have a good conversation if you ask someone if they know the circumstances of their birth, have they ever been close to death, and have they ever been accused of something they didn't do? Which I thought was amazing. So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you can play with that. With her too, what's one of the most fascinating things about this book is how many flashpoints of topicality, very current issues, but not all the same. You fit many things in here, like I said, with packing cubes, and they all fit together. They all manage to go in the same story with an eye out for interesting but terrible things in the world. What parts were easier with the buffet of terrible things in modern life, and what parts were harder when writing this one?
The easy parts were, the quote, ripped from the headlines, which is I, along with most of the world, was riveted by the trials of a few high profile entertainment figures who were accused and ultimately convicted of sex crimes. And one of the things that struck me so much about each of this, I'm thinking of 3 cases in particular, was that they had a female defense attorney. And I thought, what an interesting, now I can see exactly why the male defendant would want a woman lawyer. I think she would humanize him, soften him in the eyes of the jury, perceived to be easier in cross-examining the female victim, even if she asked the exact same questions. I think it would seem as though she wasn't being as aggressive or hostile. So I can see why he would choose her. Why did she choose to represent this guy? That is it just, naked greed, ambition, wanting the fame and the headlines? Did she believe he was innocent? Did she believe that there were shades of gray in this case? Or is there something else? So I conjured up my heroine, which I term I use loosely, protagonist, Kelly McCann, who has her own reasons for deciding to go this route and defend these men, but she, suffers the slings and arrows of being called a traitor to her gender by virtue of doing this. Her fatal flaw, which I really relate to because it's my fatal flaw, is she's addicted to winning, and often the thrill of victory would be enough to wash away any moral ambiguity that she had, about her case. So anyway, that's how that part was easy. The rip from the headlines and that's where I think a lot of our writing comes from. Is you think, what if? You take a real event and think, but what if this? And that was where I came up with Kelly and her dilemma. What happens if this person who does this for a living, who's built her entire reputation, national reputation, fortune, and success on defending these men, what if she in fact becomes the victim of a sex crime and her world becomes upended? In terms of what was harder, was I tried to, I hope it didn't pack too much in, but I wanted to examine the whole issue of the right to privacy on the part of the victims and the need to expose these assailants. And I think that's a very difficult line. I think that the book involves one of the tricks of her trade is when she gets a call from one of her clients, she often gets these late night calls from a man saying, oh, there's this woman and she's claiming something. Kelly swoops in with the check in one hand and a non-disclosure agreement in the other. She pays off these women, she gets them to be silenced. It's a weapon for her. I try to examine in 3 instances why the women would be willing to accept the payoff. Why would they want to do this? What were their reasons for wanting to maintain silence? And I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons why they would want to. I think in one case that the person just thought that she wouldn't have ever be believed anyway. She was the kind of girl that nobody paid attention to, wouldn't have believed her. Another one was so traumatized by the event that she didn't even have the vocabulary to describe what had happened to her. And then the other one is somebody who is a career woman and thought, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm not going to be, I am going places in this world and I'm not going to be defined by this act that happened to me. So they all had what you could consider very valid reasons for accepting money and maintaining silence. But the consequence of their silence is that their assailant, who was the same man in each case, goes on to attack again and again. Silence is the enemy of justice. in a case like this. And there's an actual real life movement afoot called, there's a website called can'tbuymysilence.com, where they're trying to do away with NDAs, the enforceability of NDAs in this situation.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
And there's been some movement, some statutory movement in this country and in England in limited scenarios to make them unenforceable. So anyway, that's a hard issue.
Yeah, no, for sure. And what was interesting was that in giving them their different paths, and you did do this without overwhelming. I mean, the story is trackable. You don't lose, you don't lose the thread, but all of these people have intersected with other issues that end up informing who they are, and like you said, why they do what they do. And it was a fascinating stacking of hard things, and I was impressed. So Kelly McCann, your protagonist, it was interesting that you mentioned that, because I did want to talk about her. I'm not sure I've ever seen a protagonist have to have a change of perspective. I've never seen a larger change of perspective from a main character, and it has to happen early on. Writing that, this is something I've run across, especially with my first book. A lot of people think you have to have a really likable protagonist.
They still do.
They still do, right? Some people, if they have a problem with the protagonist, it makes the book more difficult. But Kelly does have a complete change of perspective. So you talk about a little bit about writing that, because that's front loaded into the story.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the reviewers commented on that. A lot of you will find Kelly unlikable at the beginning of this book. She's a different person at the end of this book, and so she's got a character arc, which is what should happen in a book.
Absolutely.
But as you said, it's more dramatic than most, because she does go from being complicit in the crimes of her clients to the degree that defending them and enabling them makes her complicit, to realizing that this has got to end. She's got to go public. And when this first happens to her, because she is convinced in her own mind, as well as the assailant says this to her, you can't tell anybody because it will destroy your career or destroy your reputation. You have to, this is the joy of me being able to attack you, is that you can't tell anybody. And she takes that to heart. But she's so badly traumatized by this event that her trauma might manifest itself in many different ways. Hers manifested as rage. She wants to kill this man. She can't kill him, but she decides that she's going to ruin him. She's going to go out and destroy him. And she can't do it alone. So she recruits these 3 women that she refers to as the NDA women to assist her in this crime. They hate her. They come to her very reluctantly. It's an unholy alliance. But I think that the combination of her having been attacked herself and working with these other women changes her worldview about all of this. And then to further complicate matters, she's got 2 children at home. One of them is a 14-year-old boy who's just at that age of sexual curiosity. And she discovers that he's, watching internet porn, he's sexting, and it opens her eyes to this. What example have I've been raising him virtually as a single mother. What example have I been giving him about how women should be treated when he sees what I do in court every day, or he sees what I do? And again, it's these things all coalesce to change her worldview.
They provide opportunity for the plot to turn, on a dime, but like I said, easily followed, but still manages. Everybody talks about what your goals should be as a writer, to have things that feel both surprising and inevitable. And you did a really good job with that. So Bonnie and I met in a funny way, because at the beginning of the year, I got an email saying I was going to be moderating a panel at this conference that we go to called Thriller Fest. And if you guys like stuff, the Thriller Fest is more of just for writers, but there are some great crime writing conferences where readers go, and you can hang out with big names and learn a lot. It's awesome. So like the one we're going to later in the month VoucherCon in San Diego this year. But anyway, so I was going to moderate this panel, and then I was researching my panelists, and I didn't realize Bonnie was here in Western North Carolina. So that was really fun. And my panel, I had an impossible task. I was supposed to ask a bunch of writers to say something new about writing advice. It didn't work. We'll just shortcut that. But you and, oh, I'm going to drop blank. The other woman.
Oh, yes, the doctor.
Yes.
I've forgotten her name
No,
too.
she was amazing. And she also had, it's going to come to me. I'm going to yell out a name in a little bit, and that's going to be what it is. But you did have different things to say about writing advice and process. And it was exciting to me. And it wasn't pulling teeth. And we had a lot of sensibilities that overlapped, about how to get this done.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pose a couple of questions to you about how you write, because I thought it was fascinating and because I had to talk to you so briefly about it. So one of the questions everybody asks writers is, where do you get your ideas? Now, some writers bristle at this, but I think it's not because that's an illegitimate question. I mean, we sit around making stuff up all day. Somebody might want to know why. It's just that it's a hard question to answer because it makes you sound like a crazy person when you try to describe Inception. So unfortunately, I'm going to do it to you. What is it? What kind of things spark your writer brain?
It's like what I said earlier, that what if question. So you see something real, overhear a conversation, read something in the newspaper, but just think, well, but what if this was happening instead of that? And just put that twist in something, well, that would be really interesting. That's usually the way it comes to me. Although I have to say, the book that's coming out next year came to me in a dream. And I hear about this and I think that's retarded. I mean, that can't be right. But no, this actually came to me in a dream. So anyway, yeah. The mind is a strange place.
It is.
And my writer's minds may be more strange.
Almost certainly. My second book, I was falling asleep and absolutely untethered. I heard not like a schizophrenic hearing, but this line, my mother said never to keep a man for more years than you could count on your fingers. And I imagined that the woman was missing 2 fingers on one hand. So it was an extra thing. I have no idea why that happened. And I'm like, okay, well, that might turn into a book. So when an idea it takes root a little bit, what are your next steps? I know that I have learned through finding a group of writers who I like to talk with. After I have an idea, I kind of like to go to the bad guy, the antagonist first, to try to figure out if I can make that make sense. What do you do? What's kind of first after the idea takes root?
After I get the idea, the starting premise, the launch pad, I do, my next job is, who are the characters who populate this story? Who would make this interesting? What would the players be? Which would include the villain, of course. But then before I can really go any further, I have to know, where's the end point? What's the ending that's going to be? I never know how I'm getting there, but I have to know the beginning, the cast of characters, and the ending. And that's,
we heard, and this is very common in at least our lane of writing. A lot of people don't know, like they just start and just keep going. And clearly we have bookshelves full of things that get to a successful conclusion. I have no idea how they do that.
When they go in blind, they don't know.
No.
Just see where it takes me.
I'm always amazed by
Yeah.
that. So Bonnie and I, when you said something along those lines in the panel, I was like, oh, these are my people.
Yeah.
Alexia Gordon. I knew it was going to
Oh, she got it.
I knew it was going to happen. Alexia Gordon also had some, she's fantastic. And she had some amazing things to say that were different. And she was kind of agreed with us on certain things because writing days, a lot of people, they talk about you have to just sit down and just start cranking out any old thing. And clearly, I'm not saying that books don't get written this way. I can't do it that way.
I can't do it.
I have to,
And I heard a term recently for that style, which is vomit drafting.
I have heard that. I am a sympathetic puker. So
You don't want to hear that
So every
term.
time I hear vomit draft, I'm like, ah. But yes, exactly so.
I don't vomit draft.
No, I can't, because then I feel like I don't, polishing as I go gives me confidence that it's okay and I keep going, even if the stuff changes. But the description of your writing day, I really liked. Will you tell them how do you make the sausage?
Yes, I said this at the panel.
Nice.
I start off, I get up very early in the morning and
How early?
people more fun than I. Well, this morning it was at 3 a.m.
You're a horrible person.
So
That's amazing.
when people more fun than I are just getting home, that's about when I'm getting up. And then I start my day I read the New York Times online, do the crossword puzzle. Now I have to do Wordle also.
Yeah.
And then I read the Washington Post and do that crossword puzzle.
Mm.
And then I go to all my social media sites and see who's talking about what, and what's going on in the world with this perspective and so forth. I do all this, and about a couple hours it then transpired, and I get this feeling of tremendous guilt because I haven't even opened my Word document. It's just what happens then is that's usually the time when I exercise. The sun's coming up. I go for a run. If I'm in Florida, I go for a swim, and that's when my creative thoughts start pulsing. Is when I'm really on the treadmill, running down the road, or swimming laps. Is really, because I feel like I'm in a sensory deprivation tank, and just the thoughts are just flowing and the words are just flowing. I get out, I shower. If I really think I've got some good words, I don't even shower. I go right to the computer, and that's when I write. I write when the words have actually formed themselves in my head.
Yeah, wait, that's really interesting because the last 3 years, I'm not saying anything nobody doesn't already know, have been a little weird. And I didn't do quite so much crosswording because I throw things when I have to do crossword. But I would do the same thing, read the news, check social media, play some of the New York Times game. I really like that New York Times game, the
Connections. I like that too.
Anyway, but then what I found was that I couldn't, that's the way I have worked the whole time, since I've been doing this a little over 10 years now. It doesn't work for me anymore. And whatever transpired in my heart and mind over the last few years, the person who wrote those first 3 books kind of doesn't exist anymore. And I've been churning away, and now I've had to, my agent said or somebody she knows who really is into, counseling, had said, habit stacking, reshuffling the stack. So now I do what all those clowns say they do. And I get my coffee and I try to work first, and then I do all of that. And I've only been doing this for a few weeks. It's
how's it going? Seems like it's going
amazing.
Oh, that's great.
Amazing, but don't change anything because what you're doing is working great. So curious, who are some of your favorite writers?
Well, you.
Thank you.
I actually don't read a lot in our field.
No, I don't either.
I read contemporary literary fiction was my go-to stuff. I really admire people like Kate Atkinson, Ian McEwan, and Barbara Kingsolver. I mean, just on and on. I do read because my husband and I have this wonderful thing that we do. His eyesight is starting to fail, so he doesn't like to read that much, but he still really enjoys fiction. And so at cocktail hour, that's what we call it, cocktail hour, we have our wine and we listen to a book together.
Oh, nice.
And the ones we listen to are big favorites: John Sandford, Michael Connelly, the good, solid. Scott Turow, somebody
He's a great writer.
He is somebody I really admire
Yeah.
enormously, and I'd say has been a huge influence on my own work.
I actually judged the Edgar Awards, so that's sort of like the Oscars. I got to present the best Oscar. I mean, the best Oscar, the best novel. So I was best novel chair, and so I got to put on a fancy dress and go up and give a speech. It was really fun, and it was delightful because we actually got every single book hardcover that came out in our genre. My mail carrier was probably about to burn down my house, but it was amazing, and it was so delightful to see get a Scott Turow. He's still got it.
Yeah,
big time. So yeah, no, he was terrific.
his most recent book is called Suspect, although he said you could also pronounce it Suspect. And it was tremendous, and it was a real lane changer for him because he now has a young female protagonist.
Right.
And anyway, I thought it was really extremely well done.
That's great. So are you done on the road for her too?
I am.
Okay.
I was on the road for 3 weeks, but I'm back home now and planning to stay put for a while.
That's wonderful. But and while this goes out into the world, can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on or what's coming up next?
What's coming up next is a book, that working title. I often get my titles changed, including this one had a different title. This one was originally called The Silencer, because that's what Kelly did. She silenced these women with these NDAs.
Oh.
And I thought that's the whole theme of the book. Silence is the enemy of justice. And my editor said, that's a gun. That's a thing you put on a gun. And people are going to think this is a mob book.
Yeah.
And I thought, the one thing that editors, not the only thing that editors are good for, but one thing is that they understand the market, and genres and labels are so important. It's why covers are so important. It signals, to the buyer, and that's stuff that we don't know anything about. We're about what's between the covers, and not that stuff, and not the genre labels and so forth. But anyway, my previous book, House on Fire, my working title for that was Hollow House. It was a house
That's cool.
on Hollow Road where the family had become fractured, and so it felt like a hollow house. They said that's a horror title. That doesn't work.
I like that one though. So did you ever get to keep a working title?
The Cage.
Oh, okay.
The Cage was I had to fight a little bit for it, but it stayed the whole time.
So my first book, the working title was, mostly I don't have working titles because I'm terrible at titling, but it was called The Liar's Margin, and that's what it was acquired under. And I thought,
This is Three Grace Wolf.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so
which is such a great title.
well, my editor says, the marketing's talking about it and they think it sounds too literary. So we want to call it The Other Body. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to jump out this window here. And so we were throwing around ideas, and I was complaining. I don't even know, I was on the phone complaining, and I was grumbling. I was like, The Other Body, there's 3 graves. There's 3 graves. 3 graves full. So I did get to name that one.
Came up with it.
The second one was the name, and then the Hidden Things had 54 title iterations. And my critique partner found it. He actually found it was horrible. And I get a text, I'm like tearing my hair out, and he's like, I think I found it. There's a quote from Rembrandt, and I actually have the whole thing. It's the epigraph of that book I have in my office. But anyway, so you only, so far I've gotten to keep one. What about the one that's coming up next?
Well, my editor hasn't weighed in yet on the title, but the working title is Shell Games.
Okay.
Actually, it wasn't. My working title was The Confession. It's a book about a woman who's 70 years old, billionaire real estate developer in Florida, who is reunited with her high school sweetheart, and happily it opens with their wedding. They go to their hotel suite for the wedding night, and he tells her, I love you so much. I want us to always be completely honest with each other. And she says, yes, of course. She's had a lot of champagne. The room is tilting. He says, there's something I have to tell you. I have a confession to make. And he confesses to a crime. The crime was the Tylenol murders. And she freaks out. She calls the police. They come, they immediately investigate and conclude there's no way he was a Marine stationed in Lebanon at the time of the Tylenol murders. He said, I never said such a thing, but I can understand because she was drunk and because I, had said something about wanting to make a confession that she she was taking a Tylenol at the time. So he says she was confused. She was drunk. She says, when she realizes he could not have done it, but she is certain that he said it, why would he confess to a crime that he didn't commit? He is gaslighting me. He wants my fortune. He wants to have me committed so he can take control of all of my money. She thinks. The book is told from the perspective of her daughter, who loves this man that is her new stepfather, is a little afraid of her mother, who's this powerful woman, but has always assumed that her mother's mind was the sharpest one in the room. And now she's wondering, either my mother is losing her mind or my stepfather is a liar and a con man. And what do I do?
Yes.
How do I navigate? And that's what
it goes from there. So that's the one that's with the editor now. That sounds fascinating. And in the world, So are you someone, you've got one that just came out and is making its way through the world, and you've got one in the pipe. Can you work on something else? Like, are you working on a new one too?
I should be, but I'm not.
Well, no, that's okay. You're allowed, you could sleep until 3:45.
Thank you. I'm so restful. No, I have a germ of an idea, but I don't have the ending yet.
Right.
I have the premise, I have the characters, I don't have the ending, so I can't start it yet.
Oh, that's amazing. That is amazing. It is very much fun to meet another writer in Western North Carolina. Who's, we have a lot of writers here in Western.
You know,
North Carolina.
this is really a gold mine, this area
It
of
is.
writers here. So I shouldn't have been so surprised to learn that Jamie was right here in Asheville.
But
it
in the
was a
vein that
wonderful
we
surprise.
write is not.
That's
quite-
true,
Is
that's
not quite
true.
as full.
We have
so.
Charles Frazier and Ron
Oh.
Rash, but we don't have Jamie Mason and Bonnie Kistler,
No.
but we do now.
Poor us, with only Ron Rash and Charles Frazier. But no, this is fantastic. And I did think of another way that people online could ask questions. You said there were two. The third way is they could yell really loud from wherever they are. I mean, they might get arrested.
That's a great idea. Is that the segue to?
That is.
Should we
That's-
just-
That's what I was thinking we could do.
Hear from the people here first and then the people online.
Sure, we do one and then the other, if that's okay? I'll go first. As a lawyer and dealing with what should happen versus what could happen, how did you, or I'm sure you caught yourself at times fighting that. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because as a journalist, I've run into the same problem.
Let's redo the question. It's a really good question about, as a lawyer, Bonnie being keenly aware of what could happen versus what should happen and how that played into writing her too.
Yeah, what should happen would be the ideal world where the scales of justice are doing just what they're supposed to do. And I have to say, I never encountered that in my experience as a lawyer. You know, there were so many variables, things beyond the control of the lawyers, certainly beyond the control of the parties. You get a cranky judge and justice is denied. You get a smarter lawyer on one side than the other. The smarter lawyer is going to win and justice can be denied. So you see this all the time. Now, most of the time, it's not an egregious case. Most of the time, it's close enough to, rough justice that we can live with it and the client can go away reasonably happy until they get our bill. But in none of my books do I ever present the courts or the law as working like a well-oiled machine. It's always, if justice is achieved, it's through some other means, through some human means.
So that made me think of another question, in that your career as a lawyer is a rich mine for human nature and interesting anecdotes. Do you imagine that the law, what you've learned there, will always overtly play in your fiction, or is it fine enough just to have it inform it?
I think it's not. I think especially as further I'm away from active practice, I think it's becoming less overt. But certainly it did inform it a great deal. And in terms, going back to your question about could have, should have, I have to say I was a corporate litigator, so I was never in the position that Kelly would be in as a criminal defense lawyer. Nonetheless, I didn't get to pick my clients. I didn't always represent the good guy. I represented big oil for most of my career. Now, I never represented them in environmental matters or in price gouging or anything like that. But an argument could be made from an absolutist that just by enforcing their contracts and helping them collect the money that they were owed, I was enabling them to do whatever bad deeds we think big oil have done in the world. So, I'm complicit in that, to the degree, not to the same degree as Kelly perhaps, but I think the complicity is always there. Again,
Trying to make the machine, we're trying to make it work, right? But, what do we got online?
wait, another.
I'll try to get close to so the mic will pick me up. We had Ken Auletta as a guest who wrote, he's a journalist of many decades, but he wrote the book about Harvey Weinstein,
called Hollywood Ending,
Yeah.
which I think is a fantastic book. So he was a virtual author guest of ours. And something that he talked about was trying to understand women who were victims of sexual assault, maintaining a relationship with the person
After the
who
fact,
abused
yes.
them,
Yeah.
and for a myriad of reasons. So it sounds like in your book, you are exploring characters who make choices about how they're going to handle this. And of course, NDAs were integral to the Harvey
Weinstein,
Weinstein
yeah.
story. What kind of research did you do to inform yourself for this book? And what did you learn that surprised you?
Well, the research I did was, of course, tracking all of these cases and doing a lot of research, as I mentioned, into NDAs, and especially in the NDAs are used in a wide variety of things, and corporate secrets is an obvious one, and I have no problem with that. But in terms of sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual assault, looking at the reasons and survivor accounts of women who experienced something and chose to maintain silence. And I think that I went in really almost too critical of women who take payoffs. I'd say, like Gretchen Carlson, who got this multi-million-dollar settlement from Fox News. Now she has become a real advocate for exposing the truth of these organizations. But at the time I thought, you've just taken this huge amount of money. You're now a very wealthy woman, and yet nothing has changed at the climate of Fox News. But as I peeled back the layers and found out the reasons why women, and talking about the women who continued to work for Harvey Weinstein, I mean, they had careers in mind. He was still a powerful man despite what he did. They wanted that job. They'd worked so hard, they'd sacrificed so much. And the same thing is true of the character in my book, Ashley, who's the chief information officer of this giant pharmaceutical company. She worked really hard to get to that place. And now, because of this vicious man, she can't work there anymore. So she monetizes it. She calculates what was my worth before this happened. What is it now? I need that money. And so she gets a couple $1 million. I'm more sympathetic to that now, having done looking at the actual cases of some of these survivors.
Somebody in the live audience here? Did you speak with in person? Did you go through interviewing?
No, I didn't take a
You just
journalistic
went through
one. Anecdotally,
Yeah.
Yes, Liz.
I'm curious about the editing process. You were talking about the marketing and the editors coming up with titles, that kind of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about the editing process when you wanted something this way, the editor's going, this isn't working for me, and what that dynamic is like?
I can't really speak to that because I'm sorry, my editor is so gentle. She doesn't question. I mean, her editorial notes, well, she doesn't even give me notes. She calls on the phone and says, could you include a scene that makes, Kelly's marriage, we want to see a little bit more of her marriage early on, and so we can see that they were happy and in love. I was like, oh, sure, I'll put that scene in. That was the extent of the rewrites on her too.
I can speak to it a little. One thing that probably isn't obvious is that editors, especially when they're acquiring, your agents and your editors read a lot. And they have to read fast and they have to, respond. So my first editorial note was hilarious for 3 Graves Full, because she said, it's only funny if you've read it, but was there always a dog in this? I don't like it, take it out. So we negotiated that. She was an amazing editor and we had some fun. What I tried to do, because these people love books and they pick to work with you if that's the way it went down. Occasionally, like my last book was orphaned, so I was assigned an editor. But the ones who pick to work with you, they love books. They want your book to be the best. So if you go into the process trying to trust that, like in 3 Graves Full, the very last note I got was, what about a romance between the main characters. And I was like, that'd be like kissing your sister. That would be terrible. But instead of reacting, I sat with it and I thought, what else could that mean? In film, I think they call it the note behind the note. And so I thought, okay, in this book, there's a lot of running and trying not to get killed and getting thumped in the head with shovels. And there's a lot of that, but these two people are very different, but there's not a lot of time for them to connect. And so I just went through and found a couple of opportunities for them to have more human moments. And then I wish nobody had ever read the book the other way. So that's the way
It can, yeah.
that's the way to me, it was the best way it could be. And I loved the process. But yeah.
Can I just say something about dogs?
Yeah.
I just attended this wonderful writers conference in England, Crime Writers Festival, and they were talking about how you can do the most brutal murder. You know, you can have an axe murder. You can have blood all over the floor. Don't kill the dog. Don't dare kill the dog.
No, I got the dog in the story has a problem, and I got hate mail.
Oh,
Amazingly, I got a call from my daughter at 11:45 at night. I happened to be sick, so I was already in bed, and she was like, "Did you?" And I'm like, "Can we talk about this another time, please?" Yeah, you cannot mess with
can't
animals.
mess with the dog. The other very funny line, it's unrelated, but it's just a crime writer was talking about how he's learned to never describe the gun with any particularity. He's an Australian writer. Chris Hammer.
No.
Never describe the gun because you will get letters from so many American men who said you didn't get that right. That's not the right caliber. That's not.
No, that is true. That's what. Yeah, there are a lot of.
So unless you're a gun nut yourself, don't put the gun in the book.
No, unless you, and it doesn't matter because even if you're really sure, somebody's going to be really sure you were wrong. It is funny where sometimes people decide they have to. Don't feel inhibited to contact your favorite author. Generally, if it's nice, but I've gotten whole things about why I should have done something another way or what they didn't like about it. But the weirdest thing, I don't know how this works for you online, are people that didn't like your book and have to tag you into a review.
Oh, I've heard about that. Fortunately, it hasn't happened to me. They've kept their bad reviews to themselves as far as I can
And they're
tell.
welcome to it. I just don't know why they
tag the author.
So what happened
What?
when that happened?
Nothing. You can't say.
You just have to ignore it.
Oh, you can't. Yeah, you can't say.
There was a case, did you read about this? An author who was getting a lot of 5-star reviews from her in her galleys. The book wasn't out yet. But somebody gave her a 4-star review and she went after them.
I did hear about it.
She went after them.
There's no way to respond to, well, I don't know who would be upset with a 4-star
4-star
review. That's
review.
pitiful. But there's no way to respond to negativity and win. It's you just
No, even when there's, one comment that I get occasionally is, I really like this book except for the plot holes. And I always feel like saying, tell me where you think there was a plot hole and I will explain to you
Why
what you
it's
missed, what you slept through,
Wow, you read too fast.
There were no plot holes.
Right.
But anyway, this 4-star review thing,
I did hear.
it blew up on her and her publisher yanked the book.
Yeah. Oh,
Was that
Cancel the book.
Goodreads? Was that the Goodreads thing?
Yes.
yeah, you
Yes.
can't. You
That's
can't.
why I asked
Yeah, you
that.
can't say anything. You just have to. One of the strangest things was I had a decent. It was a fine review of a reviewer. For some reason, hated me personally, which was weird because we didn't know each other, and took a picture of my acknowledgements. Now, acknowledgement pages are weird. You can be chatty or you can be very succinct, whatever you like. And I've always enjoyed, if I enjoyed a book, I love a chatty acknowledgement section. So I wrote So I wrote the type of acknowledgement section I like to write. But this man hated me, and he took a picture of my acknowledgement section and said, "She fairly reeks of sincerity," and reek is the operative word, and invited people to mock me. And I had to sit there going, and of course I'm tagged in it. I'm like, oh, I can't say anything.
Being sincere is such a terrible thing to be.
Yeah, she fairly reeks of sincerity. I was like, oh my God. And I can't say anything. You just
No,
have to let it
no,
go.
no.
You can't win. You just have to let it go.
One of the things that you both reminded me of is humor in not only dealing with the process of book writing and dealing with the industry, but also is there a space where you find something funny in the darkness of your books? Is that a part of what you think about? Or is that, there's just no place for the gallows humor in your life?
Oh, I think there's always a place for humor.
Okay.
And I have to say, I don't think about it. It just seems, organic, because characters, even when they're in crisis, as we were discussing, still tend to be funny. I mean, they tend to say funny, amusing things to one another.
I'm one of those people who, like, if I bang my knee into the footboard, I laugh because I'm so impressed by how much something non-fatal can hurt. So I can't avoid it. And I do think that it makes stories ring true if you can get in there right now. I have a disinterment scene that I wrote that's apparently really, really disgusting. I thought it was funny.
I thought it was funny too.
But apparently it's really, really disgusting. And people are not happy if they read it anytime you're eating. But it seemed funny to me at the time.
Well, it wasn't a dog.
No, it wasn't a dog. Everything's fine. So yeah, I there were some things that you probably couldn't shoehorn in. But I guess shoehorning is the wrong thing. If it's forced, then no.
Yeah.
But
no, I think it has to come from the characters and their interaction with one another.
Yeah, and being confronted with this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
What is happening is terrible, but it is also ridiculous. And that's where almost all humor comes from,
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
weird juxtaposition of things.
Did you said you wrote your earlier books under a pen name? Were you worried about your law career being impacted by what you were doing or what?
Actually, I was always worried about my law career being
Yeah.
impacted, and I kept my books a secret. I didn't tell anybody. I was listening to Jamie talk about critique partners. I've never had a critique partner. I've always worked in total isolation. Nobody sees my book until my agent sees it and my editor. And it's because when I started, I had to keep it secret because I was trying so hard to be taken seriously as a lawyer. And this was back in the Ally McBeal days, when the big issue for Ally was what man was she going to dance with that night at the bar, So I was really trying so hard to be taken seriously that I thought I can't let people know that I have this secret life. And that's just remained as my process ever since. But no, my earlier books were under my real name, which is Bonnie McDougall. Kistler is my husband's name, and my agent thought when I had a second career that I should do a reset and go and use his name. And I said, oh, his name. His name.
My married name is absurd. So yeah.
Oh, so Mason is your.
Mason is my married name. Yeah. Well, my married name has a lot of letters in it. My husband said, I think you should write under your old name because I don't think that's going to fit on a book.
Did you get any pushback or did anything as a result?
When I came out as a writer. No, I mean, because I left my law firm at the same time that happened. I got a nice book deal and I became a full-time writer.
That's great.
At least for a while. So no, I didn't get any pushback. And then when my fourth book, as Bonnie McDougall, didn't sell, this is a whole nother speech about don't give up, be persistent. I gave up and I went back to my old law firm. And I have to say, they treated me like, every once in a while they'd ask me to come to a book club, but otherwise treated me like a lawyer. So it turned out I probably was worrying about nothing.
Probably. I mean, I totally get why you were, but it's been really nice that when I came out as a writer, I thought I'm a housewife and nobody's going to let me do this. And everybody was so enthusiastic. Why not? They said, why not do this? And then they were great. It's been really nice. People seem to think writers are you get a little bit of preloaded cool thing. And I don't have any cool. And so it's nice to have a little bit of a presumption of at least a smidge of cool. So
We don't have any more virtual audience questions. If there's a final in-person audience question over here, maybe, and heard from this side.
And speaking of cool, we have a poet in the back row there.
And
They
Heather
are
Newton is also
a published
author.
author, Heather Newton, who's a lawyer also.
That's right, another lawyer. Right?
And
That's
yes.
right.
We have a wealth of talent in this room.
that's fantastic.
So we can do some concluding remarks, Bonnie, if you like. To close, would you
Remarks.
like closing argument?
Closing
Here,
arguments.
I'll steer her to the closing remarks in that, like I said, if you read crime fiction, this delivers the the turns and the excitement, and I'm glad we didn't press too hard on the plot points because it is quite a discovery. So if you've heard about it, take a look, and if you even if you don't, tell somebody else to.
But with that, I rest my case.
Thank you.